Welcome back. Introduce my colleague Wei Zhou with his talk, VM AutoScaling using the CloudStack Virtual Router. Thank you, Wei.
Thank you guys for joining. Today I will present a feature in CloudStack 4.18, VM AutoScaling using CloudStack Virtual Router. About me, my name is Wei. I started on CloudStack computing in 2010, and I started on CloudStack in 2012. I'm CloudStack commuter since 2013, the PMC member since 2017. Last year, I joined ShapeBlue as a software architect. You can reach me by my emails. Here is the content of my talk. First, the overview of VM AutoScaling, then followed by some details and our changes, then introduction of the workflow of VM AutoScaling. After that, a demo and a summary and the future work. So first, the overview of VM AutoScaling. What is VM AutoScaling? In CloudStack documentation, it says AutoScaling allows you to scale your backend service and application VMs up or down seamlessly and automatically according to the conditions you defined. So when the action, when the condition you defined are matched, and it will scale up or scale down. The action is seamlessly and automatically, so it doesn't require any manual intervention. Some tips. First, scale up means create new VM. So it is also called scale out in some articles. Similarly, scale down means destroy underused VM. So it is also called scale in some articles. And in my talk, in some slides, I will add some quick tips. So I hope it will make you more clear and answer some of your questions. The history of VM AutoScaling in CloudStack. It is not a new, completely new feature. So this feature was introduced in CloudStack 4.1, actually 10 years ago. The feature was originally contributed by Citrix. So the use cases are highly related to Citrix products. First use case, so Citrix NetScanner as the load balancer provider. So it gets the metrics from the Citrix NetScanner. And the second use case, VM AutoScaling on Zen server. And there are only two metrics, so CPU and memory. This is because every CPU and memory are saved in Zen server in RRD file. But this doesn't happen on KVM and Zen server. So this feature is not working on KVM and Zen server. And in Cloud 4.18, we introduced a new functionality. So that is VM AutoScaling using CloudStack Virtual Router. The main changes, first, we get some metrics from the host CPU and memory, and as well as the CloudStack Virtual Router. So there are some more metrics than CPU and memory. And we also, the feature also supports most popular hypervisors, KVM, VMware, Zen Server, XCP, NG. And the feature is also has also implemented on new CloudStack UI. This feature also supports more VM parameters, so users has more flexibility for the VMs. The second section, glossary. There are 5 glossaries. First one is the counter. The counter is the performance counters, which is used to monitor the health of the guest VMs and also the network, the virtual router. So the second glossary is condition. Condition express the criteria to trigger the autoscale action. The last three are autoscale policy, autoscale VM profile, and autoscale VM group. So I will explain it with example. So I have a group of VMs. I wish CloudStack to automatically create a new VM, as known as scale up, if in the last 5 minutes. So the average CPU usage of the existing VM is larger than 50%. And the second condition is the average memory usage is greater than 80%. So that is the autoscale policy, and it contains two conditions. The first condition has a counter with the average CPU, and the second condition has a counter for the average memory usage. And there are some other things we want. The new VM has 4 CPU and 8 GB memory, and it is created from a CentOS 8 template. So this information is AutoScale VM profile. And another important requirement, so the VM is added to a load balancer. So for example, 10.10.10.10, and the public port is 443, and the private port is 80. So it will be act as a web server. All of this is a very simple AutoScale VM group. So some details of this feature. So I will explain, I will give some details on the glossaries and also some workflow. And so first, the counter. The counter has 4 properties. The first is provider. This is the new property we introduced in our feature. And for now, there are 3 options: virtual router, CloudStack VPC virtual router, and NetScanner. The source is where we get the metrics. It has 4 options: SMP, CPU, memory, NetScanner, and a new one we introduced in our feature is virtual router. The next one is name, so it's the description of the counter, and the last one is the venue. So it can be the OID if the source is SMP. So that's the 5 counters we added for the CloudStack virtual routers. So CPU, memory, and the last string is public network received bandwidth per VM, and the public network transmits per VM. Last one is the average collection per VM. So condition is simple. It contains condition ID, operator. There are 5 options, and last one is threshold. Yeah. AutoScale policy. It has 5 properties. Name, this is new in our feature, and conditions, the duration. Duration means CloudStack will check the duration of the metrics. So CloudStack will check all the counters or the metrics in the duration period. And for each policy, it has action. So we scale up means deploy new VM. Scale down means destroy the VM. And the query time is 5 minutes. 5 minutes by default. So its names, if we scale up the group, and in the next 5 minutes, then it will not scale up again. Yeah. So tips here, a counter can only be used once in a policy, but it can be used in other policies. Yeah. VM profile. So it defines the VM. There are 3 required fields. The first one is zone ID. The second one is the ID of the of the service offering, and the third one is the ID of template. So these three are mandatory. There are two properties which are for NetScanner, so we can skip it. User ID, this is a new property in our feature. So, and the expunge VM grace period. So that's the grace period before we expunge VM. Last one is other deploy params. So these parameters, this property already exists for many years, but it doesn't support. But there's no parameter support in VM scaling, in AutoScaling. So in our feature, we support 6 parameters: root disk size, disk offering ID, the data disk size, SSK pairs, affinity groups, and network IDs. Please note, the dynamic service offering is not supported. So the dynamic scaling is also supported. This feature is not for the VMs. And second, the user ID is base 60 encoded string. Some of you might know that since CloudStack 4.18, the user data will be a first-class resource. So it will have user data will have a ID, UUID, and it will be persistent in database. But for here, for this feature, we currently only support user ID as a string. Last one, the node balancer network will always be the default network of VMs. So no matter no matter what the network IDs are set. Yeah. Autoscaling VM group. The first one is node balancer rule ID. And each group has a minimum number of VMs and maximum VMs. And the interval means CloudStack gets the traffic periodically, depends on what you set as the interval. And the scale-up policy IDs is the list of the ID of scale-up policies, and scale-down policy IDs is the ID of the IDs of scale-down policies. And the last one is profile ID, so it's the ID of the AutoScale VM profile. Please note, each VM group must have at least one scale-up policy and at least one scale-down policy. And VM group can have multiple scale-up policies and multiple scale-down policies. Yeah. Almost the counter supported APIs for counter are create, list, and delete. They are roots. They can only be performed called by root admin. And the rest of the glossary, condition, VM policy, VM profile, and the VM groups can be called by the normal users. And in our feature, we add a new parameter named cleanup to the delete AutoScale VM group API. For the counters, it is not recommended to create new counters because if it is not supporting the backend, it won't work. Yeah. So workflow. Something we need to do before we create a VM group. First, we need to create a node balancer rule, which is required for VM group. Second, the template, VM template must be ready. And if needed, and we need to create some other resources. Yeah, for example, service offering, SSK pairs, affinity groups, and other networks. We had some issues when we create a new ISO network. It doesn't have a public IP if there's no VM running. So in that case, we can acquire a new public IP, and it will be act as the source net IP of the network, and we can create node balancer on it. Yeah. The VM AutoScaling capacity is enabled by default for all the existing network offerings with the load balancer. If you want to disable the feature for your users, your customers, you can create a new network offering, but do not check the VM AutoScaling support. Yeah. It is supported on UI and API. Yeah. Something we need to know, if memory usage is used in the scale up and the scale down policies. So for KVM, the VM template must have the Virtual Ro driver installed. And we also need to add some configurations in the agent property, yeah, to enable the statistics, memory statistics by VM memory ballooning. And so the VM.mem balloon.test period is 0 by default. So that means disabled. And we have tested 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and 6 seconds, and all works fine. If VM AutoScaling is enabled and also the statics is enabled, there might be issue that Windows VM might be stuck after knife migration. For the server, the VM template must have the PV driver installed. Yeah. So if you want to backport this feature to your fork, and you need to backport string commits to fix the memory statistics. Yeah. So let's start. Create the AutoScale VM group. It's very simple. Here is a screenshot of on CloudStack UI when I create a new VM group. So the first step, create AutoScale VM profile, and then create conditions for scale up policy, and create policies, and create conditions for scale down policy, and create scale down policies, and last step is create AutoScale VM group. In CloudStack Management Server, there are some monitor tasks which runs for each AutoScale VM group to get the metrics from CloudStack host, CloudStack virtual routers. So the task is created when VM group is created or enabled, and the task will be shut down and removed when the VM group is disabled or removed. So first, when the task depends on the interval of each VM group, the monitor task runs in different time. So when the task, for example, if the interval is 10 seconds, then this task will run every 10 seconds. When the task starts, it first check whether the VM group has the maximum VMs in the group or minimum VMs in the group. So, for example, if the current if the current available VM in the group has reached the maximum number, then nothing will be done. Oh no, sorry. If the VMs doesn't reach the minimum number of the VM group, then CloudStack will create new VMs without checking the metrics. And if the VM numbers is above the maximum number of the VM group, then CloudStack will destroy one or some of the existing VMs. So that's the total number of the VM will not exceed the maximum number and not less than the minimum number. Yeah. So the next step is get metrics from host. That means the CPU and memory. And then get metrics from CloudStack virtual routers. And all of these statistics are saved into CloudStack database. So the table is also new in our feature. Yeah. Some information about the metrics. For the memory usage on KVM and Zen server XCP, it is calculated by total memory VM total memory minus the free memory, and multiple 100, and then divided by the total memory. So it is if we run free inside VM, you might get some different numbers. So it is consistent to the free number in the output, but it is not the available memory. And for VMware, the usage is got from the hypervisor. So it's active guest memory divided by the total memory. It is also different from the output of free command in the VM. For the retrieve and transmit bandwidth per VM, we have added some IP tables in the VR, and we get the metrics by fetching the counter of the IP table rules. For node bandwidth collection, we have enabled the HA proxy socket in HA proxy configuration, and the average collection per VM is calculated by the node HA proxy statistics. Yeah. There are no issue in CloudStack get the average node balance collection. I have logged the issue on GitHub when we start VM or stop VM or make some node balancer changes, the HA proxy service in CloudStack VR will be reloaded. That leads to an issue that the active collection is still alive, but the counter is reset to 0. So that's the issue with HA proxy. And about the public network bandwidth, so other VMs or services in the same network might have some impact on the counters. Because we get the metrics in network level, not in IP or in port level. Yeah. So next part is check AutoScale VM group. When I get the metrics, we need to check the metrics and determine the actions and perform actions. So in CloudStack, there is a background thread which named AutoScale Monitor. It checks all the VM groups in parallel. The first check is the maximum member and the minimum member check. And if it passed, then it will note the data from database and process the data. Then it will check all the scale up policies, scale down policies. If the policy is not in quiet period, and all the conditions in the policy is are true, then the CloudStack will do scale up or scale down depending on the action of the scale policies. If it's not true, then CloudStack will check whether there are other policies left. When all the policies are processed, then the thread will end. So some tips here: scale up policy will be checked before scale down policy, and please be attention that each network has a network rate setting. So if the public network bandwidth is too high, then it might not work. Yeah. The last one is policy will be skipped if there are some inactive records when we get the metrics. Yeah. So about the date, there are 3 types of data we get. The first one is instant data for each VM, for example, CPU and memory. And in this case, we just calculate the average of the records. And next one is aggregated data from individual VM. So that means, for example, the VM network or disk statistics. So the value is the aggregated the total number of throughput since the VM is started. So for this kind of data, we just get the value in the period and divided by the time in seconds. Yeah. The next one is instant data so for example, the null balancer collection. So we do not know which VM has the collection to each VM, but we know the collection to the whole null balancer. So in this case, we get the average date and then divided by the count of the number of VMs. Last one is aggregated data for the VM group. For example, network bandwidth. So that's is the throughput normally when we start the VR, but it's the total traffic to the whole network. Yeah. So we have to divide by the count of available VMs. The available VMs means the VMs in running, in starting, stopping, migrating. So stop the VM is not available, so it's we do not consider it. We do not consider it in the calculation. Yeah. And last one is the second one. Aggregated data for individual VM is not used in our feature, but it might be used in future work. Yeah. Scale up. When CloudStack determine to scale up the VM group, it will first check the maximum number of VM group, and then update the state to scaling, and create a new VM, start VM, and add the VM to null balancer. And that's it. So the VM name, the format of VM name is AutoScale VM dash group name dash sync number and dash 6 random letters at the end. Yeah. Scale down. So it's quite similar. First, check the minimum number of the group and update the state to scaling. Remove a VM to the answer rule, then expunge the VM. And publish event and update the state back to the delay board. Yeah. Besides the monitor, check, scale up, scale down, we can change the settings of the VM group and also the policies, the profiles, the conditions. Yeah. So the first we need to disable the VM group. Yeah. And then we can update the VM group, VM profile policies, conditions, and add new VM, new policy, or remove the existing policy you do not need. Add conditions, remove conditions, and then last step is to enable the VM group. So all the settings will be enabled. Yeah. Some tips. It's not allowed to add a VM to the VM group. Yeah. But when the VM group is disabled, we can remove VM is group from the group and also from the null balancer rule. Yeah. And when VM group is enabled or disabled, scale up, scale down, and inactive records will be inserted into database. Demo. So I have created a test environment where I have installed the CloudStack package built from my PR. And the manual server is CentOS 7, and the hypervisor is VMware 7.0.3. Yeah. Yeah. Here it is. Sorry, the resolution is not good. Yeah, no, it's not better. So in the computer section, there is a new subsection here, AutoScale VM group. Yeah. As we said, before we create AutoScale VM group, we need to create a load balancer. So I have created a network here, and also the network has a public IP, and now I'm going to create a load balancer rule. So I can see HTTPS, and the public port is 443, private port is 80. Yeah. And check here, there is a new field here, AutoScale. So true, and yeah. Now there are two ways to create a VM group. We can create a VM group by click this button, yeah, in this page, and we can also create a VM group from here. Yeah, so compute AutoScale VM groups. I've created a VM group for testing. Now I'm going to create another VM group. So the zone, first we need to choose a zone, and a template is required, and component offering is also required for VM. We can, in CloudStack 4.18, we can override the root disk size or override root disk offering, which are exclusive. And there is also an optional field, data disk. Yeah, so if you don't need, you can keep it empty. Networks. So you can choose at least one network, but we can choose multiple networks. And the default network must be an isolated network or VPC tier. Yeah, so for here, we choose the isolated networks. Next section is node balancer. So we need to choose a node balancer. I think in this one, ATPS is what we just created. Scale up policies, yeah. So I can just spice the duration, 30 seconds, query time 30 seconds. Yeah. So each policy has a default name, and we can change to whatever we want. And the counters. So there you see there are 5 counters: average CPU, average memory, and the saved bandwidth and transmit bandwidth. And the last one is the average connection per VM. So, yeah, we can add multiple scale up policies. Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, by memory. Yeah, same as the scale down policies. Yeah. So here I can get one. Yeah. So add another one for the average collection. Yeah. So in the advanced mode, there are some advanced settings. For example, SSK pairs, fin groups, and the user date. For the user date, we can just type something. Yeah. Okay. CloudStack UI will encode your input by base 64, so we do not need to type to input the base 64 encoded string here. Yeah. So the name of the VM group, the expunge VM grace period, and the max number to 3, minimum number to 1, and the polling interval is 10 seconds. So on the right, we can get an overview of the VM group. Now click create. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, I missed here. Yeah. Now we can see the process of the creation. First, create a VM profile, then create scale up condition and policy, scale down condition and policies. Yeah. And last one, create VM group. Yeah, that's it. So we can when click the VM, the name of the VM group, we can see the details of the VM group. So it has choose the network name, the network ID, node balancer ID, node balancer provider, the public IP, and the public port, private port, the minimum number and the maximum number of the VMs, and the available VMs for now. Yeah. So by click the view instance, we can get the list of the VMs in the group. So here you can see that there is already a VM running in the group. Yeah. So that's now I'm going to manage the VM group. Yeah. So first step is disable the VM group. Yeah. So by default, all the fields we can see the details on VM profile, node balancer rule, scale up policy, scale down policy. But these fields are disabled and not editable if the VM group is enabled. So if it's disabled, then we can change the settings. Yeah, for example, 60. Yeah. And some parameters, for example, disk offering, it must be an offering ID, and root disk size, we can check to, for example, 10 GB, and the new VM will have 10 GB root disk. Yeah. So the scale up policy, we can add a new policy or create or edit existing policies. Yeah, for example, 30. Yeah. Yeah, we can add a new policy here. Yeah, so for example, duration 30. Yeah. And that's the default counter. Yeah. Yeah, same as the scale down policy. Yeah. In the events tab, we can see the events of the VM group. So the scale up, disable, update. Yeah. Now I'm going to enable the VM group. Then the settings will be effective. Yeah. So let's go back to the VM group I just created. Yeah. So now they have it has two VMs, and after 1 minute, it might have 3 VMs. Yeah. So, sorry. So summary, this is a new functionality in CloudStack 18, and CloudStack Virtual Router will be used by node balancer provider installed, so we do not rely on NetScanner. And it supports more counters from CloudStack Virtual Router, and it supports most popular hypervisors, and almost all the features are supported on CloudStack UI. Yeah. So future work, first, we might support more counters. For example, the VM disk statistics and the VM network statistics per NIC. And it would be good to have the throughput of specific public IP and port from the VR. And support network support user data IDs, which is user data IDs is user data's first class in for the 18. And the support share networks, so the node balancer will be optional, and but of course we cannot. The metrics from the virtual router were not available, but we can use some other metrics. For example, I just introduced like VM disk statistics and VM network statistics. Yeah. So that's it. Any questions?
Online, before I go on that, anything in the room? Yes.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Just a question, I didn't hear any mention of it. When a VM is downscaled, or it's downsized, and the VM isn't expunged yet, does it, if it's downscaled, the VM is not expunged yet, does it reuse existing VMs, or it spawns?
It is expunged.
Well, but if it is not expunged yet, if a VM is not,
So if you remove, if the VM group is disabled, you can remove the VM from group.
No, but if it's just,
but in the scale down, the VM will be expunged. Yeah.
It always expunges.
Yes, always expunged.
Okay, but if there was a timeout for that, right?
No.
No. Okay, no. Then I didn't understand correctly.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
There is a grace-free period before we expunge VM. So that is the time for example, if the grace period is 30 seconds, then we will wait 3 seconds before we expunge VM. Yeah.
Right. Yes, that was what I was asking.
Yes.
If the grace period hasn't expired yet,
Mm-hmm.
so if it's set to a week,
Yeah.
then it upscales again.
No, normally if we scale down, trigger a scale down action, an inactive record will be inserted into database. So it means if there is inactive records, then all the statics before the action will be inactive. Yeah, will not be used for the next check. Yeah.
David.
Anyway, this is a really nice feature. So one thing I'd like to know is during scale down, how does it scale on the VM? Is it random or it goes in a last one, the order like that?
Normally it's expunged the last VM you created.
The last created VM.
Yes.
And is there any way to taint a VM to say don't bring down this particular VM?
Then you have to. If you want to expunge a specific VM, then you have to disable the VM group.
No. What I mean is, I want to taint a VM and say, this VM do not bring down when you're scaling it down. Is there a way to taint it and say, don't bring down this VM, bring down other VM, but this particular one should stay up?
No, for now, there's no way to do it. No.
So a new feature.
No.
Thanks.
So the priority of the VMs are equal. So yeah.
Thank you, Wei. Seems like a great feature. Is it so when scaling up, we have a max VMs number. If we exceed this max VMs and we still get a lot of load, are we going to get some alert or something to alert us that there's some load and the group cannot exceed more?
Currently, no. But I think it's a good idea. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running a bit short on time here. There are a couple of questions that have come in on the app. Wei, question here. Can I use auto-scaling with different conditions at the same time? For example, CPU and memory?
Yes.
And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Wei. Any more questions from the room? For David? Okay, I think we've already covered Bobby's question that David took, apparently. If there's nothing else, Wei, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining.